Howdy. Well, what you see before you is technically four rifles. They all have one thing in common, though. Here, let me point this down at them before I sit down. Here, let's see here. There we go. Okay. This one over here, people would say, that looks like an SKS. Well, technically, sort of, kind of, it is. This is a Chinese Type 56, which is an SKS copy. Now remember, in the 1950s and 60s, the Soviet Union was demanding that all of their satellite nations and allies tool up for the 7.62x39 cartridge and some version of either the AK-47 or the SKS. And they would give a data package, send some engineers, do all kinds of things to try and get folks to follow their lead. They wanted everybody to use the same thing. Well, next here, this is the VZ-52 from Czechoslovakia. And this is the Egyptian Rashid. What all these have in common, other than the fact that they each have, in their way, a weird action, and I love weird actions. And this one was so much cheaper. Well, actually, these two were very cheap. I know, but when I bought them, they were very cheap. This one over here, by the way, is only here as an example of this one. This is a Hakim. This is the original Egyptian copy of the Eric Eklund AG-42B Yeoman, which was his design. And what happened was Gabel Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt after the colonel's coup, in which they kicked out King Farouk. Well, Farouk had been using the FN Model 49 rifle, which is a superb rifle, in 8mm Mauser, because that was the caliber that Egypt was using. Well, when Nasser took over, he decided that he didn't like the FN 49. He also didn't like any of Farouk's higher command officers, fired them all, and promoted a bunch of his own people. You know, kick the bad guys out and put your own bad guys in. Anyway, he went looking for another rifle, and he went to Sweden. And Sweden said, well, we have this AG-42, and he says, let's bring some engineers and a copy or two down, and let's check them out. And they did, and he says, sold. And he bought a whole data package from him. So Sweden came down, and in a armory in Cairo, they built a factory to build a copy of the AG-42. And in Egypt, it was called the Hakim. It's a 10-round detachable box magazine, direct gas impingement, 8mm Mauser, locked breech rifle. Well, soon after that, he wanted to build the Aswan High Dam, and America said, no, environmental issues, and you didn't hire the right people, and what are your pronouns? I mean, you know, that kind of crap. And Nasser said, get these infidels out of here. Who else is there? Hey, Soviet Union, can you send some engineers down this way? And they said, comrade, yeah, we'll do it. So they came down and says, oh, as long as you're hiring us, you want to join the Eastern Bloc? And he says, sounds reasonable. And they said, good, here's a few billion rounds of 7.62x39. And he says, what the hell am I going to do with those? Everything I have is an 8 Mauser. So he went back to Eric Eklund and his own engineers and said, can you do something about that? Well, he wanted to make nice with his Soviet suppliers. So what he did is he built this thing. This is the Rashid. When it was actually released, it became nothing more than a substitute standard for the tank corps, and people like that. But you'll notice that the holes cut here and here look similar. The bayonet, although this is a stake or what like this, it's a it's not a blade bayonet. This is a blade bayonet. This is actually much closer to the Russian original. So is that, come to think of it. But anyway, the whole idea here is to make nice, but keep it our own local design, if you can call a Swedish design local. About 4,000 of these were made and some exported. I know Wikipedia says 8,000. I happen to have some other information. About 4,000 were made, and a few hundred were imported into the U.S. I bought this years ago when they first were imported. This one, the VZ52, again, the Czechs were being pressured into making some changes and do the things in a Soviet way, so they did this. But rather than the 762 by 39, they issued this in 762 by 45, a proprietary Czech round that was never used in any other rifle. That went on from 52 until 1957, when because of pressure from the Soviets, they changed it to 762 by 39, and they basically rechambered this to 762 by 39. It became known as the VZ52/57. Then in 1959, they were forced again to change to the AK-47 pattern, which they developed their own version of, and it's called the VZ58. Quite a bit different than the VZ52. But the point here is, all of these, actually every single one of these, is a copy in their own domestic, small country way of the SKS. I do not own an SKS. I do have this this Type 56, which is basically a type a VZ. Is basically an SKS, but it has some peculiar differences. By the way, the Rashid here uses the same action as the Hakim. They did do a couple of interesting changes. For instance, they put this loading handle on it, which on the Hakim, all it is this piece of wire up here. Interestingly, on the AG42, they don't even have that. They just have two little gripping cones on the rear of the rifle to pull the thing back and cock it. The Egyptians thought that at least a little wire hook would be much better. Oh, another problem is that this thing is supposed to be loadable from stripper clips. It even has a stripper clip guide. You know, just like, oh gosh, like the stripper clip guide on a SKS. Problem is, this or this, these are standard SKS stripper guides. This is actually Norinco ammunition, so it's actually washed steel cases that have been copper washed. These are steel cases that have been lacquered to look like copper, except for the last two here, which happen to be boxer primed reloads, which I sort of did myself. But this particular stripper clip will not fit this stripper clip guide. I have no idea why. Also, if you put 10 rounds through this thing, this whole receiver becomes super hot. And if you try to put another stripper clip in, you're going to burn your fingers. The actual way to load a Hakim is to, oops, oh, I did that wrong. I'm doing it upside down here. Is to take out the magazine and load it into the magazine and put it back. It's the only way to do it rationally. This also takes 10 rounds, but this one is a little better designed. This uses a, well, it's a uniquely Czech design. Let me see if I can do this. I haven't done it in a long while. Let's see. Well, come now. Be nice. Yeah. It takes gas from the gas port here, and then it moves this thing here, which is a little, well, it's sort of like a toggle bumpy thingy that hits the gas tube, which is, or the gas port, I guess you'd call it the piston, which is in here. And then that cycles the action back here. Yeah. I wonder if I can do that. Let's see. If I bring that back, yeah, like that. Interesting. This is a fascinating design. So's this. So I like gadget factors, and the gadget factor in this is very high. Let's see if I can get it back on. Let's see if I push in here and down. Yeah, I did it. to me. Good for me. Anyway, this is just a look at the Cold War from the USSR perspective as versus from ours. I have a few other rifles I could show you of the Western Bloc, NATO. But anyway, that's about it for today. Happy trails.